Let me share my screen. And let me minimize this. Okay. All right. All right. All right. How's everybody? Glad it's Friday.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm bummed out. It's snowing out.
Same here. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's weird.
Professor, I had a question about the P1 that's due today.
Yes.
So it's a very quick question. So sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, not at all. Please.
So I had my UML diagram and I went to a TA's office hours to make sure it was correct. And they implicitly told me it was too simple. And I had those 3 tables that were part of the requirements. So I was wondering, how many tables are we expecting to create in order to have a good grade?
Well, I'm wondering what they meant by too simple. So really the requirements are that you need one class that deals with a user and 2 domain objects, right? And then you can have a one-to-many and a many-to-many, right? And I guess you could end up with just three tables, plus you need at least 1 more for the enumeration. So that, yeah, definitely you need at least 4, but 3 for the data modeling and 1 for the enumeration. But that's the absolute minimum, yes. Also, now if you're doing many-to-many and you're doing a relational database, then you'll need a mapping table because you'll need to reify the many-to-many relationship. So that means you'll need an additional table to the mapping. So that's 5 tables, right? If you're doing non-relational databases, then you don't need the extra collection, right? You could use arrays instead. You could just get away with 3 collections.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I had both of my relationships be one-to-many, so I'm thinking maybe I should throw in a many-to-many.
Yeah, I believe the requirement is that you have to have at least 1 many-to-many.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's take a look at the syllabus to see where we are at. So yeah, so last week we took a look at the working on the P1 design and creating the database, which was due today, but I did move the due date to Monday. Although you shouldn't fret too much about completely finishing P1, right? It might very well be that you have a preliminary design, a preliminary database, and come Wednesday or Friday of next week, and you realize that you need an extra field, or maybe you need an extra table, and because as you're implementing it, you say, oh, where are we going to store this, right? Where are we going to put that? And you realize that, hey, there's no place for us to store this piece of information. So if you do find yourself having to go back and maybe add something or tweak something, that's totally normal, right? And so I would just submit what you have if you have that minimum set of requirements, and then move forward with what we're going to be covering today, the modeling and the front end implementation. What we're covering today does assume that you've worked on P1, you're almost done. Perhaps you've completed it and submitted it, but you're very nearly done, okay? And so P2 is going to build on that, and it's going to ask you to implement a software data model that represents your relational model, or your non-relational model, right? So that you can represent that data in memory, right, by fetching the data from the database, right, and replicating it in memory, so that you can then apply transformations or logic or whatnot, creation, deletion, and whatnot, add in memory, and then map those changes back into the database. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and then that's going to be due on the 23rd, I believe. So yeah, later next week. And P3 is basically, it's just basically P3. It's just just complete, right? Just finish off whatever you've got left for the project, right? And so basically, today we're going to be talking about some of the minimum things that you need to have for a user interface. And P3 would add to that just a few more tweaks that would make it perfect. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about creating the data model, in-memory data model, and the front end that goes along with that. So you did have 2 assignments that already prepared you for this, which was the ORM assignment and the web the data-driven web application assignment. And so those 2 assignments were designed to introduce you to the technology, get you going with implementing something. There was a handhold. We were hand-holding you all the way through, telling you exactly what to do. In here, the project is asking you, okay, well, having shown you how to do that, go on and now do it on your own. Although today we're going to demonstrate how we could work on that together, right? I'll demo it. I'll provide the source code for you, and then you can go from there. We're not asking you to use a specific. We're not asking you to use a specific technology stack. Even though I am going to demo it using Java for the object data model, and I'm going to use React for the front end. You're free to use whatever other technology stack you prefer for the project. So feel free to, instead of using React, feel free to use Java Swing or Python, PyQt, or whatever you prefer to use as a user interface. Also for the middle tier, feel free to use Django or use any other infrastructure that you would prefer instead of Java. Okay. So yeah, with that, let's see if there's any questions. It says, hey, how will submissions work for group that has student in other sections? Yeah, so only one team. So say you have 2 teams, one in section 3, one in section 4, and they're related to one another. So only one team needs to submit. Okay, but both teams, well, all members of both teams will get the same grade, right? But only one team needs to submit. Right? At the end of the semester, I'm going to ask you to fill out a form, and in that form, we're going to ask you to, say what team are you in, what section are you in, what team is related to what other team, so that we'll know all the team members, right, to make sure that if when we grade a project, we'll know which students are related to that project, right, across both sections, right? But you only need to submit it only in one of the sections. Do you have a preference on how to implement this? No, you're free to do it. Yeah, the project is very open-ended, right? As long as you meet the requirements of the data model requirements and the user interface requirements. What's behind that? It's up to you. For P2, do we need to submit a design of our UI? No, you don't. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at P2. P2, user interface and data model. All right, so here we go. Yeah, so there's two parts to this assignment, this project-related assignments. Sorry to go back to this, but for P1, did you say that we need both many-to-many relationships and one-to-many, or either? I could have sworn I asked for both, but maybe I'm wrong. Let me check. P1. Well, where's P2? Why is it P2 up there? Maybe I requirements. What did I say? Domain. Oh, one-to-many or many-to-many. Anything at least one relationship. The relationship should either be one-to-many or many-to-many. Looks like I said, either or. So yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay. So I'll make sure that if you only have one-to-manys, then that's fine. So whoever was asking, was it Queen Wen? Yeah, it doesn't say that you have to have at least one of each. So yeah, you could get away with one less table. You can get away with one less table. Yeah, you can implement the whole project with just 4 tables. One more. Does P1 need store procedures? No, no store procedures. There was a Piazza post that brought up testing store procedures. No, no store procedures are required. They're encouraged, but they're not required. All right, excellent. Great questions. Let's move on. So P2. Why is it moving it around? P2 is down here. Okay. So two parts. The first one is the data model. And what we mean by data model is that you've already created a relational data model or even a non-relational data model, right? Whether you went with MySQL, Postgre, Oracle, the relational databases, right? So you already have for the previous assignment, you have a conceptual data model, right? Which you've used UML to do that. And you've created a relational data model or non-relational data model, which you created by creating the database, right? All the create tables or collections, right? Maybe you've done some inserts. So you already have 2 data models, right? One you've drawn in UML, okay? And from that, you've implemented a relational data model or non-relational data model. So you already have that. So for this assignment, you need to now be able to use that relational model, right? You need to actually connect to the database, right? And be able to extract data from the relational database and bring it into your computer, okay? So that you can do logic around it, algorithms, you need to do business logic, right? Whatever it is that you're building, right? Remember, the database is only for storing the data, right? There are, I mean, you could put algorithms in there as well, right? Through store procedures and whatnot, but we're going to be using whatever, either Python or Java or whatever, right, to implement the logic of your data, the algorithms, right? So you need to bring the data, you need to copy or cache the data that's in the database into your application. Okay, that's part of this data model. Okay, and then once it's copied into your computer, into your CPU, into your RAM, right? You need a mechanism by which the user can interact with it, right? By issuing commands somehow, right? And the best way to do that is through some graphical user interface, okay? So you're going to provide a set of screens that are going to render the data and allow the user to issue commands to manipulate that data, right? Either create new data, read data, update data, delete data, right? Those are the 4 basic operations, right? CRUD, okay? Okay, so let's go into some more detail on what each one of these means. That, okay. So for the data model, what we're asking you to do is that you take one of your user classes, okay? And as a requirement, you have to have at least one user class, right? And so, and you're gonna need at least 2 domain object classes. So take those three classes, 1 user and 2 domain classes, okay? So if you take those 3 for each one, right? Where there's a table and there's a class in the UML diagram. Well, now either in Java or Python or C# or JavaScript, right? Whatever you choose, you're going to have a model class or module, and you're going to have a DAO for per class or per model. So if you have 3, right, a user and 2 domain objects, you're going to end up with 6 classes, right? 3 data models and 3 DAOs, right? 3 data models and 3 DAOs. Okay. The data models are going to be the collection of properties or fields or variables, right, that describe the data in memory in your CPU, right? In Java, you use Java classes. Right? C# you use Java classes, right? If you're using Mongo in JavaScript, then that's the schema file, right? The schema files where you use mongoose.schema, right? And then you declare all the properties and their data types and the collections that they map. In Java, it would be the Java classes that you annotate as an entity and add table and add ID, add generate, and you have IDs and each one of the fields, the setters, the getters, right? All that good stuff, right? So that's the data. That's the data model. Obviously, each one of them is going to have a repository. Obviously, it's not listed here, but obviously you need a repository to go along with each one. And then you're going to have a DAO. So the DAO, if you remember, it's a design pattern that states that you should encapsulate or modularize all the data access that goes out to the database to encapsulate it inside of a single module or class, a reusable component. Okay, and it's going to contain all your functions that would allow it to interact with the database. Now, there are 5 classic functions that should always be implemented. Sorry about that. There should be at least 5 functions or methods that all DAOs should include. And these are the minimum ones, right? You can create many other ones, but at least these 5 should always be there. There should be a create function, a find all function, find, update, and delete. Okay, and these are going to be written in terms of the low-level libraries that are actually communicating with the database, right? In Java, it'll use the JPA through a repository. In Mongo, it'll use the Mongoose model, right? That they both provide generic functions like find all, find by ID, find one, right? Save, create. All those are low-level functions that are implemented by the libraries, the respective libraries, either JPA libraries or the Mongoose library, right? Or if you're using a Python library, I'm sure you'll find something equivalent to that. Now, the DAO is going to wrap these low-level functions, right? We did this, right, in one of the assignments, right? We created DAOs that wrap these low-level functions in terms of these higher-level functions, right? The ones that are exposed are implemented by the CRUD repository and the Mongoose model. Those are generic, and they're called create. That's it, right? Or they're called find, or they're called update or remove. So what you're going to do is that you're going to wrap those functions around with a higher level function, okay, that is going to be explicit for your domain, right? So this, for instance, if the user is a faculty or student or an author, then this would be, create user or create student or create faculty or create author, and it's going to take us argument and author or student or faculty, right? Same thing here. The generic find, you're going to wrap it inside of a find all, and then find all students, find all faculty, find all books, find all recipes or whatever. Okay, so yeah, these pointy brackets mean that you're going to replace that with the actual model that you're using. Okay. So yeah, so one is for inserting, one is for retrieving either all the records or one record by its ID, updating an existing record, or deleting an existing record. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? All right. Okay. So yeah, let's continue. So then you're going to create a user interface that goes along with this, right? Again, considering the three classes that we're talking about, the minimum, user, and 2 domain objects, right? For each one of them, you need to create at least 2 screens. Okay, you'll need to create a list screen and an edit screen. So in general terms, the list screen allows you to list, right, or show all the records of a particular data model, right? So this would be, if you have a faculty, right, a course, and a section, then you have to be able to list all the faculty. You have to list all the courses. You have to list all the sections. Yes? Now, the list could be laid out in different ways. It could be laid out as a bullet list, as a table where you have a whole bunch of rows. It could be rendered as a grid. That's up to you how you want to lay it out. Right? It doesn't matter. I would keep it simple. Just a simple bullet list is plenty. We're not going to, we're not looking for anything fancy. This is not a UI course. We're not gonna, criticize your color scheme or where the things are correctly aligned or anything like that. Right? It needs to be functional. Obviously, it needs to be neat, right? That I need to be able to understand what's going on, right? So try to keep it, as understandable as possible. Okay. Yeah. So the list screen allows you to render the entire collection of things that are in a table. It's also going to have a button that allows you to navigate to the edit screen. Okay, you can navigate to the edit screen in 2 ways. Right, you can navigate by either clicking or selecting one of the records listed. Right, say the 3rd row or the 4th cell in the grid, right, or the 5th bullet. I can click on that, and then it navigates to the edit screen where I can edit that specific record. Right? Or I can click on the create button, and the create button is going to navigate again also to the edit screen, but no record, right? It'll be used so that you can enter and create a brand new record. Okay, so 2 ways to navigate to the edit screen. One for editing an existing record, and the other one for creating a brand new record. Okay, so once you're in the edit screen, remember you can reach here 2 ways, right? Either selecting an existing record from the list screen or clicking on the create button. All right, so if you clicked on the record, and so right, and because you want to edit an existing record, the ID gets passed to the edit screen somehow, right? So the edit screen needs the primary key of the record that you want to edit, right? And with that ID, it's going to go out to the server, it's going to fetch the record, it's going to render it however you want it to render. And once it's rendered, right, you can either look at it, just so that you can read the content. You can update any one of the fields, right, and then click on an update button. You can delete, right, by looking at it and says, "Ooh, I don't want this record anymore," and you can click on delete. Or, right, if you have navigated here, not because you're trying to edit something, but instead you want to create a new record, right? Then there's nothing for you to read or update or delete, right? Because you're not reading anything because the record you're going to create a new record, so there's nothing to read, right? And you got here by having clicked on the create button. So on the creating side, right, you can create a new record, entering all the fields. You click on save or insert or create or whatever, right? And then the record gets created in the database. Okay. All right, so yeah, that's the minimum, the absolute minimum. Obviously, you can render it any which way you want, right? It doesn't have to look like a table or list or grid. You know, it could be something fancier if you want. It's not required. Okay, right? We're only gonna grade you for the functionality, right? That it's actually working. Right? We're not gonna grade you or lose points if you know you didn't apply good UI principles. Okay, that makes sense. Are there any questions? All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to demonstrate how you go about accomplishing this, right? Just to give you an idea what we're looking for. Again, this is an absolute minimum, right? Feel free to reuse the code that we're going to go on. We're going to take a look at it today, and you know, just tweak it for your own purposes. We're going to reuse some of the code that we worked on in the assignment that you should have built for the assignment. We're going to reuse it, rename a few things, rename the files. We'll go over it, explain how they work, and then hopefully you'll be able to use it for your own purpose. Okay. All right. Excellent. Let's see. All right. This is what we're working on earlier today. With the other section. So let me stop this and terminal. Let's see, git status, git branch. Okay. So git commit this. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go to the solution of one of the assignments, the web assignment that you worked on and that we walked you through all the steps. So it's implemented here, right? And if you remember, we gave you a starting code here under the social directory, okay? And then we asked you to complete some source code. We asked you to implement a few things. So we're going to be reusing some of that source code. We're also going to be creating all our work, the models, whatnot. We're going to be doing it under here in a brand new package, right? So that you'll be able to find it easily. I'm going to put everything, all the work in a separate branch. So git checkout. I'll call it, let's see. So this is section 4, P2 demo. Okay, so all the work will be in this branch. Okay, so first of all, let's create a database for our purposes. So let's head over to MySQL and let's create a brand new schema. So this is db underscore design underscore 04. Say apply. There we go, and we'll do all our work here. We'll make this the default, and there are no tables. It's empty. So if we head over back to our template, actually before we get started, any questions before we get started? All right, let's see. We just created a new schema. Let's make sure that we are configured correctly to connect to that schema. Okay, our schema, I just called it db design underscore 04, right? Underscore 04. So it's that one. Okay, good. All right. Let's close that. And so let's do all our work under here. And I'm gonna the package I'm gonna be working on is based on the domain that I've chosen, right? Let's see. let's work on movies, right? Say my domain is movies. So things that I might find in the domain of movies, I could find actors, right? I can find movies, movie theaters, right? Directors. So all those are examples of human data models or non-human domain objects. Okay, so let's call this movies. Okay, and under here we'll create our data model under the package models. And we'll also need the repositories. So we'll create that, repositories. And we will need the DAOs as well. New DAOs. Okay, so let's first create the models. So let's say, let's do an example of a one-to-many of between theaters and movies. So each theater can play many movies. Actually, that would be a many-to-many. Okay, let's keep it simple though. Let's say one-to-many, a movie theater can have many movies. Right? So this is called a theater, and we'll have also a movie. So Java is movie. Okay, so for the movie, let's see. Let's have. Let's have for the movie, we'll have things such as what? Let's see, private integer for the primary key ID. We'll have private string. Let's see, maybe the title of the movie. Okay, maybe the plot of the movie. Okay, let's keep it simple, just that. All right, and the movie. Right, this being a one-to-many side, a one-to-many relationship between theater and movies. Theater would be the one side having many movies, right? So now they could reference each other by stating that the movie knows who the parent theater is, right? So private theater. And the same thing on the theater. On the other side, it could reference the movies as follows, right? We can have the movie theater having private integer ID, private string, maybe the name of theater. Okay, and the theater has the movies that are playing there, right? So private list of movies, right? Movies. Okay. All right, excellent. So let's keep going. We do need for all these to have all the setters and getters, right? As well as the movie. We need to generate all that. There we go. And now we're ready to start annotating it to map it to the tables where we want this to be stored. Okay, so on theaters, we might say we annotate it as entity. We might specify exactly which table we want it to be mapped, because the default would be just theater. But the naming convention that we're following is that they are theaters. The classes are, did I spell it? Theaters. Yeah. Are plural, right? Then we annotate the primary key, and we annotate that it is a generated value with the strategy of identity. All right, excellent. What else? Also, we need to implement the one-to-many relationship in Java. The one-to-many is implemented with arrays or lists or collections, right? But we don't have that in relational databases, right? Instead, they're implemented using foreign key primary key, right? And so to give the database JPA a hint on how to implement this, we're going to annotate this as being on the one side of a one-to-many relationship, and knowing that the movie is going to reference the theater as a foreign key to the theater here, right? And we say, how is it referring to us? We're referring to us as with the field theater. You see, theater, there it is, right? And on the movie side, we're on the many side of a one-to-many relationship, right? So this would be on the many side. Okay. Well, so let's annotate the movie as well as the entity and specify the table that is going to be mapped to, right? So this is movies. The primary key, and we don't want to generate this, so we'll delegate it to the database. Okay. All right. Let's see. I think that's it. Let's look at the theater. All right. All right. So let's start the database and see if we can connect to the database. So let's make sure that it's pointing to the 04. Okay, that looks right. And I believe I do have the username and password called like that. Use your username and your password. So let's start it. Let's see if this blows up. Okay, so it looks like it created all the tables for us. Let's head over to the database and refresh this. Looks like there are several tables that were created, including our movies table is there and our theaters table is there. Perfect. Right, they are. Let's see. We have, obviously we have no theaters. And what about movies? Apparently we don't have any movies as well, right? Notice that the movie does have a foreign key. There it is, theater ID, that is referencing the theater ID here, okay? All right, so let's create a couple of theaters. So let's see, we call this theater T1 and T2. Let's apply. Okay, notice that it auto-incremented the IDs 1 and 2. So let's create a couple movies. Let's see. So this could be Aliens. And it's playing in movie theater 1. And Terminator. Also playing in theater 1. And finally, Titanic is playing on movie theater 1. All right, it's playing a James Cameron weekend. And let's see, in another theater, we can have a Star Wars to movie theater 2 and Star Trek in movie theater 2. So let's apply. All right, so we got some data. Let's now see if we can, we can retrieve this data onto our application so we can start interacting with it, right? Maybe displaying it and CRUDing it and whatnot. Okay, so let's see. All right, so we head over back to our code, right? What do we need? So we got the model. So we still need the repository and the DAOs, right? So first, let's implement the repository, and we'll go with the default implementation. If we need to override anything, we can, but we'll try to keep it as simple as possible, right? So we'll need a movie repository. And so this will be actually not a class, it's an interface. And this is going to extend a CRUD repository, which basically is going to give us the generic functions to interact with the database, right? We just need to configure it. What is it going to CRUD, right? It's going to CRUD movies, right? It requires for you to give a template of what you want to CRUD, plus it wants to know the data type of your primary key. Okay, all right, so we have the repository for movie. I'm just gonna, the theater repository is almost identical, right? The only really difference is that instead of CRUDing movies, it's going to CRUD theaters. Okay, there we go. All right, so we got the default repository. Again, if we need to override anything, we absolutely can. All right, so now we can get started on the DAOs. So the DAOs, we're going to say we're going to implement let's do the theater first, right? So theater DAO, and here we would implement all the CRUD operations, the minimum CRUD operations, which I listed for you here, right? We need at least these: create, find all, find, update, and delete. Right. So since we're implementing the theater DAO, for the create will look something like this: public theater, right? Create theater, right? And it takes a theater as an argument. Theater. And for now, let's return null. It's also going to have the find all. So public find all theaters. So it's going to return the list of theaters. Okay. It takes no arguments, and for now, it's return null. Then we have just a find model. So it would be public find theater by ID. Right, so what does this return? A theater. And it takes as argument a ID. And for now, let's return null. Okay, so then we have updates. So we have public, update theater that we are going to return perhaps an integer. And so we'll take as argument the ID of the theater that we want to update and the new values for the theater. So new theater. Yeah, for now, let's return null. And finally, we need to implement the delete. So delete, also going to return maybe an integer. Delete theater. And we only need the ID of the theater we want to remove. And we're going to return null. Okay. Oh yeah, so this is the beginning, right, of implementing the DAOs, the 4 or 5 CRUD operations that are very standard. You could certainly implement more. You could have find theater by name, for instance, right? Yeah, but these are the minimum. Okay, so let's implement the first few. How about we'll do find all theaters so that we can get started implementing the list screen. So the list screen, if you remember, is going to list all the records, right? And so how are we going to retrieve it? Oh, well, here, find all theaters. It's going to retrieve all the theaters. Okay. All right. So how do we retrieve all the theaters? Well, we're going to need the repository. Let's bring in the repository, and the way we're bringing it is that we're going to auto-wire the theater repository. Okay. And then the implementation of all theaters is trivial, right? We're going to use the repository.findAll, right? And we are going to cast this probably. Let's cast this. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So basically, we're done with the DAO, right? The only thing is that the way that we use this, who's going to use this, it depends how is that we're going to interact with it, right? And the way what we want to interact with it is through a REST, through React, right? React, we want to use React as the front end, and the only way that React can talk to this, right, is through an HTTP API, right? A web interface, right? And luckily, implementing a web interface is very, very easy in Java. And so the way we do that is by annotating any class that you want to make available, right, to the rest of the world. You just can annotate it with a REST controller, and then the function that you want to expose or make available to the rest of the world, you can annotate it with a HTTP mapping, right? Either get mapping or post or put or delete. The easiest one you could use is just get mapping, right? And so here we say this is going to be mapped to API theaters. Okay, it's going to call that. All right. Well, all right. Let's see if indeed we can retrieve data. Let's restart this. And let's try hitting the server at port 8080. Here it is, localhost 8080, and then API theaters. Let's do that. Let's try that. So that's let's see, local hosts, 8080, and then API theaters. Looks like it's going into an infinite loop. Right, let me stop that. Stop that. And the reason is that what's going on here is that find all retrieves theaters, right? So when it gets to the theater, notice that it wants to go and fetch all the movies that are related to that theater. Okay, so when it gets to the first movie, the movie has also a foreign key to the theater, so it goes back to the theater. When it gets to the theater, it goes down back to the movie. So movies go back to, so it gets into an infinite loop. So we can break that. We can break that by saying to ignore. When you are trying to convert this into JSON, just ignore this field. Right? Don't try to go back to the parent, because otherwise you're going to get into an infinite loop. So let's restart the server. There it is. Now it's much better, right? There it is. So Theater 1 is playing Aliens, Terminator, and Titanic, whereas Movie Theater 2 is playing Star Wars and Star Trek. Excellent. So we have the beginning of a web API. We just need to be able to hit this URL to retrieve that data. Right. So that's where we're gonna focus on next. Right. So let's head over to the client side, right, and see if we can programmatically do this. Okay. So let's see what we gave you a couple weeks ago. So we gave you a couple weeks on the web app React. We gave you this directory here, social, where we asked you to do this, implement this one-to-many relationship between users and blogs. One user has many blogs. Okay, so users is kind of like our example on how to implement the one side, and blogs is going to give us an example on how to implement the many side, right, of a one-to-many relationship. Okay. All right. So I'm going to create here a directory where I'm going to do all my work for movies. Right? And I'm going to copy stuff from what we worked on, right, in our web assignment, right? So I'm going to copy these 3 files, put them in movies. Okay, and let's see what we have. Okay, let's take a look here. Let's look at index.html. Let's see. All right, so at the top we got some title. Maybe we can change that, right? We'll call it movies. Everything I will leave alone. This we need to change. We need to change. So this was actually, we don't need any of this. Okay, so here, actually we'll get to that. Go back to that in a minute. So we'll see here. This is the beginning. This is the entry point of the application, right? This is the entry point of the application. Basically it's trying to render all the content here dynamically, right? That's part of the React.js magic. I'm not going to get into it. You don't need to know. But basically it's loading this file right here. This index.js is being rendered here. Index.js is exporting something. Looks like it's exporting a variable called app, which we are creating an element of it, and then we are injecting it into the root here for dynamic rendering. So whatever this returns, right, is being rendered. So let's look at what index does. So index looks like it's trying to import a whole bunch of stuff from users. We don't have any of that, so I'm just going to remove that. We're going to replace it with our own. Actually, I'm going to just leave one just to remember to do it. I'm just going to comment it out. Looks like we have a couple of routes. So these routes, what they are mechanisms for navigating in our application, right? And they're looking for these URL patterns at the top in the URL. And if they see that URL pattern, it renders one or something else, right? Depending on the pattern, it'll render whatever component we have here. But we have no components. We have no components, right? So right now, I'm just going to I'm just going to remove these components because we don't have any components. We don't have any components. We'll create components in a minute. I'm just going to keep one of them. I'm just going to keep one of them. Right? Again, starting from scratch, right? Very, very little here stuff. Okay. I just want to be able to say hello, right? Just say, just to verify that this even renders, right? Renders anything. So I'm going to put here H1 movies. Okay. And presumably here, I want to be able to render movies /movies. Presumably, it's going to give me the list of all the movies. Okay. Also, if I don't say anything, it's going to default to movies here. All right. All right. Okay. Let's see if this even renders. I'm going to select index here. I'm going to say run. Okay, so this looks promising. We are indeed in there. We are right here, and it's not loading anything in the route because we didn't put anything to load. Let's render. By default, we want to get started with rendering the list of movies. Actually, no. Let's start with theater. Sorry. Right. So this is the movie database. Call it movie database. Right, and we're going to start off with theaters. I'm going to start off with theaters just because it's a one-to-many relationship. Presumably, you would choose theater 1, and if you go to theater 1, you would see the movies playing in theater 1. Right, and if you go to theater 2, you would go into theater 2, and then you would display the movies playing in theater 2. Okay, so that's why I'm going to focus first on theaters. Okay. So anyway, so remember that for each domain object, we're going to create 2 screens. Right, one screen is to display a list of all the records, and the other screen is so I can edit a particular record. All right. So what I want to do is that if you by default you're at the root of the navigation tree, right? I want to render the list of theaters. That's where I want to begin. Or if you say /theaters, that I also will render the list of theaters. It is basically what it says with an array. Okay, so let's create a component that can render a list of theaters. Right? Okay. Let's see. I'm going to create a directory here. Create a directory. I'm going to call it theaters. And the 2 screens that I need. Remember, for each domain object, we need 2 screens. Right? So we'll need one that lists all the items in that table, and the other one allows you to edit. So I'm going to call this theater list, and the other one I'm going to call it theater editor. Okay. All right. Okay. In the theater list, I just want to render the name of the screen. Okay, so let's do that. So we're going to do const theater list. It's just a plain old function which is going to return what I want to render. And what I want to render, right, is just a header saying that this is a theater list. That's all. Right, I'm going to export default theater list. Right, so back in our navigation, now we know what to render at the root, or if I say theaters, what do I want to render? I want to render the theater list. There it is. See that my IDE automatically imports it. Perfect. Excellent. Okay. All right. Right now, the only thing that theater list is going to render is just this theater list. That's all. Okay. All right. So this is a brand new file that we created. Actually, 2. Right? We created these 2 new files. They need to be added, right, to the index. They need to be added to the index using this as a template. So we need those 2 files. We need the theater list, and we need the editor at some point. All right, so I'm gonna load it already. You're gonna put it in there. This particular the order here between these 2 doesn't really matter. They do need to be declared before the index. They need to be declared before the index because the index references. See that? It's referencing the theater list. So it needs to be declared, theater list needs to be declared before the index, before it gets referenced. Okay, so order matters. All right, let's go back here and refresh. Notice that indeed it renders the list of theaters. Okay, so it's being injected in there. Right? Notice that if I'm in a different screen or a different URL path, then I would be somewhere else. For instance, if I type something else, gibberish, notice that it does not render theater list, only if you have either at the slash, see a slash right there, or if I have theaters. And so if the URL looks like that, then it renders the theater list. Otherwise, it doesn't render. It renders something, might render something else. Okay, so what do we want to render in theater list? We want to go to the server and fetch all these theaters. So I can render T1 and T2. How do we do that? So notice that I've done this manually, right? I typed this localhost 8080 API theaters. I want to do that programmatically though, not manually. So how do we do that? So it's a good practice to encapsulate all data communication between your application, your user interface, right, and the server where the database is being hosted. Right? It's a good practice to encapsulate that. Just like you encapsulate all the database access into a DAO, that's a good practice. It's also good practice that if you're going to do communication, inter-process communication, also to encapsulate that in a single module. Right, so let's copy that and let's do that. I'm going to create here in the same directory as theaters. I'm going to create a new class, right, a new module here called theater service. Right, so service, right, is usually responsible for communicating, right, with some other process. Okay, so I'm gonna paste here the theater URL as a string, theaters. And I'm going to use this to talk to the server. I want to fetch this information from the server. So how do I fetch it? Well, first let's encapsulate that in a function, right? So that we can reuse that function, that functionality. So I'm going to say const, and give it a name, right? Find all theaters. Notice the naming convention I'm following. Find all theaters here on the UI is going to eventually call in the DAO. Is going to call this find all theaters on the DAO. So these guys are going to be talking to one another. So find all theaters on the UI is going to invoke this /API/theaters, which on the server, it's listening for that incoming request and is going to be implemented by a function called the same way on the server, right? It's going to retrieve what? It's going to retrieve all your theaters. All right, so how do we do that? We're going to fetch from the theater URL. That's going to fetch the data from the server. It's going to come back to us as a response, right? And we're going to just return, we're going to parse from this the JSON. We're going to parse the JSON that comes back from it. All right, that's it. We're done here. Okay, we just need to export this. And export this as an object that contains all our API. Okay. All right, this is a brand new file. We need to include it in index. Notice I'm going to include it before the lists. I'm going to include this new file, the service file I just created. Right, service. I'm including it before both of them because both of them are going to use the service, right? Because service implements the communication and they both need to communicate with the server, right? So I'm putting it before both of these. So the two screens are going to need the same service so they can talk to the server. So that's why I'm declaring it before. So in the list, I'm going to import that brand new service I created. I'm going to call it locally as just plain old service. It's in the same const. Oh no, wait, sorry. Import service from service. There it is. So now I can make the invocation, right? So how do I make the invocation? So when do I make the invocation? Well, I want to make the invocation when this component first loads, right? When it loads right now, it's just rendering that, which is not very interesting, right? It's only rendering this. I wanted to render the whole list of theaters, right? So on load, I want to go fetch the data from the server, bring it over to the screen so I can render it. So how do I do that? Well, in React, there is a function that we can use to execute code when we load, right? Almost like a constructor, right? Something like a constructor. And so we can bring that. It's called use effect. Use effect. You can bring that from React. Okay. And we can use effect to execute something on load when the component first loads. Okay, whatever we put in here is going to execute when the component first loads. Okay. So what do we want to do? We want to use the service to go out and find all the theaters. The theaters are going to come back to us, right here. Right. And for now, we're just going to console log them, right, just to make sure that we are getting the theaters back, right? And whatever we point out to the console, we have it locally on this screen. Okay. All right, let's try it out. So here, let's display the console. Let's see, is there a question in the chat? So if I go to the console, there's nothing there. Let's render this. Oh, okay. So it's complaining that there's access. That I'm breaking some security policy, and the reason is that the server is running at localhost 8080. See that? And our UI, our screen, is running at localhost 63,342. And that is considered by a browser as a security breach. Okay. Basically, it asked the server. It went out to the server and said, "Hey, server, is it okay? Are you accepting?" It went out to the server right here, right? Went out to the server and asked the servers, "Hey, server, are you accepting calls from port 63,342?" And the server says, "No, I don't think so. No, sorry." And so it fails. Right, so we can easily fix this by going back to the DAO and saying, "Hey, I know you're going to be receiving all these invocations like this. Everything's cool. Don't worry about it. Just don't worry where it comes from. So just respond, right? Just bring down all your guards, all your security. We're going to turn off all security. So we're going to say cross origin is okay. It is okay for requests from a different origin to come to you, to where you're running, right? Accept anything. We're going to say star, accept from anywhere, wherever it comes from, wherever it originates, let it come through. All right, let's restart the server and let's inspect and let's refresh. Still localhost 8080 API theaters. API theaters is this one. Return theaters. Origins. Do we start this? Oh, is it not running? It doesn't look like it's running. Oh, the demo application needs to run. Sorry. Let's restart the demo application. I was starting the index multiple times, not the server multiple times. Okay, let's try it again. Let's refresh. Okay, notice that this time it did not complain. Look at the console, and it did not print anything. Did it go to the network? Let's see. It doesn't seem like. Okay, here's theaters. You went. There's the get, and it came back. Oh, there it is. So it did go. So it did go. How come it's not printed to the console? Not printed to the console. let's go back to my theater list. Let's see. So it is generating the invocation, console log theaters, find all theaters, fetch, blah, 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 response, return response JSON. That looks okay. What is going on? Network preview. There's our both theaters. That's not the console. Why are you not printing the console? All right, let's step through this. Let's look at the source. Theaters, theater lists. Put a breakpoint right there. Let's put a breakpoint right there. Let's see. Let's try it again. Refresh. Continue. Interesting. Did we put the breakpoint? Let's refresh. Not sure what it's stepping through. It's confused with my breakpoints. Oh yeah, there we go. Service, find all theaters. Yeah. Let's put a breakpoint right there. Oh, it's not letting me put a breakpoint. Interesting. Console. We can force a break, presumably here, by using the keyword debugger. It's a return. We are doing a return, so that should be good. Oops. And in theater list, we should be able to force a debugger there. Debugger there. App. Want that. Continue. There's debugger. There we go. Okay, there we go. Theater. Okay. And there it is. Console theater. There it is. Why is it not displayed to the console? All right. Anyway, we know we have the data right there, right? We do have the data. Continue. But the console is not displaying. Error, 6 messages. Oh, I had the filter on here. Yes, it is displaying the console. There it is. Okay, so it's working. Perfect. Perfectamundo. Okay, excellent. So once we have the data here in the screen, we want to render it. Okay, we want to render it. So how do we render it here? Like somewhere maybe under this data list. Well, we first need to put it in some variable, right? Copy it in a local variable. Let's create a variable, call it maybe theaters, right? To do that, right? It's not going to be any variable, right? We need to maintain state, right, in the component. So we're going to use state here in React. And the way you create a state variable is like this: do theaters, and also a mutator, set theaters, theaters, and we say use state. There we go. So theaters is going to be initially empty, an empty array. So what we're going to do is that when we get the theaters from the server, we're not just going to print it out to the console. That's not very useful. We're going to set the theaters, this variable here, set theaters with theaters, and then we can render it. Let's say render it over here. The raw JSON data that comes back, you can say JSON.convert it into string, whatever the theaters array that comes back. Display the raw content. Still doing breakpoints. Let's remove the breakpoints. There we go. Okay, see that we have raw array here, right? There's my array and my first object, right? Containing the movies, right? And I believe this is my second somewhere here. This one's T2. Okay. All right. So let's render it as a list. Let's render it as a list. So we can say UL, that's a list. And we're going to iterate over theaters. We'll say theaters map is like a for loop that's iterating and passing us each instance of a theater. And for each instance, I'm going to return the following user interface as a line item in our bullets. Right? So that's just a bullet that contains theater and the name of the theater. There it is, the bullets. You can dress this up a little bit. You don't have to, but you can dress it up just by making maybe this as a changing class here. And we can say that this is a list group. And then you can dress this up a little bit and say list group item. But it's absolutely not required. Okay, that looks a little prettier, but it's absolutely not required. Everybody good? All right. So yeah. So that's the list, right? All the lists. Let's work on editing this, right? I want to edit this one of the theaters. So I would like to be able to click on the theater, and then it navigates to some editor that we can edit it. Okay. So how's that? Let's first create a component. The editor, which is right now it's empty. Okay, let's create just a placeholder right now. So this is const theater editor. Again, it's just a function that returns the UI that I want to render. We'll call it theater editor. And we're going to export default theater editor. Okay. I think we already included this in HTML, did we not? Yes, we did. Okay, so we don't have to do that. But we need to now navigate to it. How are we going to navigate to it? We're going to use the same route, same idea. So this will be a route that if you see in the path, if you see the following, actually no, just string. That looks like this: theaters followed by some placeholder, right? Like theater ID, something like a variable. And if you see that, and it matches exactly, right? Then I want you to render this new theater editor component that we just built. Okay. All right. So notice that right now it's just slash. So slash theater also just renders here. But if I have, like one or something here, notice that it navigates to the theater editor. So that, right, because the URL pattern matches this, right? And since it matches perfectly, then it renders the theater editor. No longer does it match this. It doesn't match this or that. It matches this. Right, so it doesn't render the theater list; it renders the theater editor. Make sense? But we do that manually. That doesn't count, right? That's cheating. What we want to be able to do is that when we click on the theater list. Okay, let's do that when you click on the theater. How do we do that? Well, let's head over back to the theater list over here, and let's create this. Let's make a link out of this. Let's create a link out of this. A hyperlink. So link, right, like that. And we can specify where do we want to go when you click on it by saying to. Okay, and so this is going to be a string template. It's gonna where do we want to go? Well, we want to go to something that looks like that. So when we go to something that says theaters slash, and we want to pass the screen where we're going, we want to pass the ID, right, which is in theater.id. Okay, so we're going to embed here as an expression theater.id. So that, okay, so link is a component that we need to load, we need to import it. So it's const link from React router DOM. Okay, so let's refresh. There it is. Notice it's a hyperlink. If I hover over it, you see at the bottom, you'll see the URL. So that one is, there it is. So slash theater slash one. and this one is /theater/2. So I click on this, notice that this becomes /1. I go back, click on this, this becomes /theater/2. See that? Okay, so now the theater editor has everything it needs to be able to render the particular theater, right? It has the ID right here. You can retrieve that ID and then go out to the server database, right, and fetch that particular record by ID, right? So first of all, let's see if we can retrieve that ID so we can have it in the screen, right? And then use it to go fetch the data from the database. Okay. So let's do that. So how can we retrieve it? So we're here in the theater, right? We're in the theater editor. We need that ID. How do we retrieve that ID? Well, to retrieve that ID, we're going to use a function that can retrieve parameters from the URL, right? And the function is called use params, right? From React router DOM, right? And the way you use it is that you need to tell it what the name of that parameter is. We know that this /2, we actually gave it a name, didn't we? When we declared it here, see that? We gave it a name, TID. So that's exactly the parameter we want to retrieve. We're going to say const, we're going to extract the TID from use params, right? And just to show you that this works, let's render it right here, right? So we do that. Notice that indeed it's 2. We click on this one. Notice that it's 1. So the screen knows about the ID, and we can use it to go fetch the ID. Okay, so all right, let's work on that part. How is that we're going to retrieve that particular theater from the database? Okay, let's head back to the database. Back to the database in the DAO. Right, we have a function that we thought we were going to build, and there it is. Right, find theater by ID. Let's build that. Right, so to implement that, we can use the repository. So repository dot find by ID. We can pass the ID into a get. That's it. Right. We now have to map it to a URL. I'm going to say get mapping, right, API/theaters. Right, and then I'm going to pass in the TID. I'm going to use the same name I used in the user interface. I'm going to use the same thing, TID. They don't have to match, right? But it just keeps me straight in my head. Right, so I need to parse the TID from the URL that I'm going to pass you in the URL. And the way we do that is by annotating this path variable. So read this placeholder that I call TID, read whatever the actual value is, convert it into an integer, and then pass it to me as an argument. Okay, let's restart the server. Let's see if this works. So here we were presumably able to retrieve all the theaters, but now I just created a new URL that if you pass me an ID at the end, I can retrieve that one theater, right? Or the other one too. There's the other theater. See that? One at a time. But I don't want to do this manually. I want to do it programmatically. So let's do that, right? So where do we put all the communication between the user interface and the database? Here in the service. Remember that? Okay, so the function, I'm going to use the same function name, find theater by ID. I'm going to pass the TID. Okay, I don't need bugger anymore. It's going to look very, very similar to this, almost identical. But it's going to be the theater URL. It's going to be the same URL, but I'm going to have to append the ID at the end, right? So how do we do that? And the way we're going to do that is as follows. We're going to put backticks around this, curly bracket, expression, right? And then we're going to append TID at the end, TID. So this builds the string. This builds the whole string. Okay, and we're going to export this over here. All right, now we have a means of communicating to the database, we can head back to our editor. We have the ID, we have the service, we have to use it, right, to retrieve the data. So let's bring in the service. So let's import just like we did in the lists. Let's import it just like that. Okay, we've imported it. Also, we need to use this find theater by ID. We need to use it when we first load. Remember, we know how to do that already, right? We did it here. We used use effect to do that, right? So I'm going to just copy this from our theater list. I'm just going to copy over into our theater editor. The use effect would probably needs the use state as well. We can copy the use effect just like we did before. Okay, so this is going to be executed when it loads. What are we going to do on load? We're going to do the service. Let's do find theater by ID. I'm going to pass the TID. And presumably this is going to be the theater. Only one theater. And we're going to do console. We'll do console log theater. And let's see if that works. Okay. Let's see. We have two. Look at the console. Let's look at the console. Gonna refresh. And there it is. Theater number 2 with the movies, right? The name T2. Right. If we go back and do 1, let's do that. Let's do T1. There it is. See that? T1. So we got the data here. We can render the raw content. So before we render the raw content, we need to put it in a state variable, right? And again, same thing we did earlier, right? It's going to look just like that, but instead of theaters, plural, it's going to be one, just one theater. So theater, set theater, right? So here we're going to do, set theater, the theater. Now we have the state variable stored locally in the component, and we can maybe render it here. Say JSON dot stringify theaters, theater. Okay, let's try it. There it is, right? There's our theater 1, name T1, and the movies Aliens, Terminator, and Titanic. If we go to tier 2, it says that's the T2 is the name, and then the Star Wars and Star Trek. See that? Okay. Right, so this is an editor. It's supposed to be a let us edit, right? So we need kind of like a form where we can edit this, okay? So let's do that. Let's create a form with the fields that we can edit. Let's see, I guess we can't really edit much. The ID should not be editable, right? But at least we could display it. And the name, we could edit the name probably, and that's it, right? The movies, we can display it another way. But let's see. What we can do here is create a whole bunch of input fields, one per field. So let's create a label for the ID. All right, and then an input field where we're going to display the value of the input field is going to be theater dot ID. And we'll do the same thing for the name of the theater. And this is name. Okay. Let's look at that. Okay, so we have that sort of like an input field, and the values, there they are, right? We can make this a little prettier, right? You can dress this up a little bit with a class and form control. So this is going to dress that up just a bit. Okay, that looks a little bit prettier. Okay. All right, excellent. Let's keep going, right? So remember, what we'd like to be able to do is from here, be able to maybe delete the movie or update the movie or create a brand new movie, right? So down below here, we like to have a whole bunch of buttons, right? One that allows us to maybe delete the movie. One is save the changes to the movie. Maybe we want to be able to create a brand new movie. Maybe we want to cancel, right? We don't want to do anything with this movie, right? So all these buttons, oops, all these buttons would be at the bottom, right? It would allow you to do something with this movie. Okay. So let's take a look at being able to say, maybe change or update a brand new movie, update an existing movie, maybe change the name of the movie, right? Notice that it's not letting me type. Or it's not letting me type. Right? So that's something annoying about React. There's a couple of steps that you need to do to make something editable, and it's a little bit unintuitive. But let me show you. Once you grasp it, right, it's actually pretty easy. So what we're going to do is that what you need to be able to do is that we need to be able to change this attribute, the name, for every keystroke, right? And record the accumulation of all the keystrokes that you've made, basically, right? That's what we're doing. So on change, the way we do that is we say on change, as you are typing, grab each one of the events, right? Each keystroke, and as you grab the keystroke, okay, we're going to grab the new value that you've typed, right? Maybe const new value, right? That is in e.target.value. That's where it's found. Okay. And what we're going to do is that we're going to change the local state variable. We're going to update this local state variable, whose title is now going to be whatever the new value of that input field is, right? So, and it's done as follows. This is going to be a slightly cryptic, right? It's very JavaScript based. It's one of the new features in JavaScript, which makes it very short and very tight, right? And but it's still cryptic, right? So it's as follows. I'm going to say set theater, right? I'm going to set the theater to be the following. I'm going to take the old theater. So ... theater means copy the old value of theater, comma, and then override the following fields, right? So whatever title you had, whatever ID, leave those alone. But for the new name of the theater, take the new value. So I am overriding that field to be this new value. Okay, this is a little cryptic, but that's what it is. All right, so that should allow me to edit the T2. Okay, it allows me to change the T2. Notice that it's changing on the fly, right? The state is changing. Everybody good? All right, excellent. So, okay, so the save button is going to allow us to, presumably, is going to allow us to send the changes to the server, to the database, and the database is going to update this in the database, right? So we need to be able to respond this on the database. How do we do that in the database? Let's head over to the DAO. In the DAO, we have an update theater. There it is, right? So we're gonna need to know what the ID of the theater that you're changing and the new values for the field of the theater. Okay, right now, the only thing that we're letting you change is the name of the theater. Okay, so we can very easily do something like this. So we say get mapping, API theaters, the ID of the theater, TID, right? And then maybe the name, the new name. Okay, so you have to send me a URL that looks like that with that information. We're going to extract from each one of these, just like we did here. We're going to extract from the path that TID, and we're going to extract the name. Okay, update theater. I guess we're not going to pass you the whole object. Actually, I'm gonna just copy this. I'm gonna leave this one alone. leave that alone. And this is going to be different. So I'm going to put here just a name string, new theater name. Okay. So this, and then I'm going to call this update theater name. There we go, like that. Yeah. So, and the theater name, we're going to grab it from the path right here. Name. All right. Okay. So how do we do that? How do we do that using JPA? So in JPA, we do the following, right? We first retrieve the object. So we say theater, right? We say repository finds by ID, and which ID is it? This one, right? We're going to retrieve it from the database. Now we have it in the memory. Okay, .get, right? .get. Now we're going to update. We say theater.set name to the new theater name. There it is. And then we're going to put it back and say repository dot save the theater. There we go. Okay. Right. And now we're just going to respond back. Actually, this save. Oh, well, this would be a good. We can just return this, right? We could just say return that. And that, I believe, is just theater. There we go. Okay. All right, let's try it out. Let's try it out. Let's see if it works. So what does the URL look like? It looks like theater2/name/say T22. I'm changing the name to be T22. Let's do enter. There it is. Looks like it's modified, right? Let's look in the database to see if it's true. Let's look at theaters, refresh. There it is. See that? It changed it to the database. Perfect. So let's tie it to the user interface. Right? Let's tie it to the user interface. Now we did this manually, right? We don't want to do it manually. Right? We want to do it programmatically. So where do we put all the communication to the server? In the service, right here. Okay, and we'll call it, say, const update. What do we call it in the server? In the database, we called it update movie theater. I like to use the same names so that I can keep it straight in my head. So this is TID, new theater name. And we're going to do a return, fetch. So it's the same URL over here. I'm just going to copy this. So the pattern is the TID/name and then the new theater name. Yes. All right, there we go. Let's put this here. Update theater name, and now we can from the editor we can invoke the save button, right? The save button. We can the save, right? We can call here a function that does this. So const, update theater name, right? Uses the service. So service dot update theater name. We have the ID, don't we? We have theater.id and the name that we have been typing, right? That's what it expects, right? It expects the ID and the theater name, right? Yeah, perfect. And then we're going to call this function when we click on save. So on click, call that function. All right, let's try it. Let's restart the server, the database. And let's head over to the UI here. Let's refresh. There's the theaters T22. Okay, and let's call it Cinema Paradiso. Let's save. Let's see if this explodes. Let's save. Let's refresh. Yeah, it looks like it. Oh, like it works, right? notice that even here, right? It's working. Cinema Paradiso comes here. Let's go to the database. Let's refresh. There it is, Cinema Paradiso, right? So it looks like it worked. It's updating and whatnot. Okay. Obviously, there's more to this that I'd like to show you, but I'll work on this and share it with everyone. I'll submit what I have on repository, and I'll share the code with you if you care to use it. Feel free to reuse all of it or none of it, right? It's up to you if you want. Right, perhaps it might be a good place to start to get you going, okay? All right, folks, that's all I have to do today. Any questions?
I have a general question on my project. Just
Yes.
if you have time.
Sure.
I can wait for everyone to. Oh, okay.
No, you can go. Go ahead.
Sure. So I have a many-to-many relationship, which I reified with a junction table, but I'm wondering if I have to include other information in that table too, because the tables are recipe to ingredient, but the issue is that a recipe has many ingredients and ingredients can be used in multiple recipes. So I just have the junction table recipe ingredient, but it doesn't really have any other information.
Well, if you don't need to, you don't have to. We just, the way we capture in UML is just using a mapping table, right?
That's why I can share my screen if you want to see it.
Yeah, you don't have. Yeah, sure, if you want to. But if you have fields, usually we render it as we draw it as an association class.
Yep. Just right.
But the implementation is the same, right? The implementation is the same. Basically, you have the 2 foreign keys, and then any additional fields. Like for instance, in that recipe ingredient, you might have quantity, for instance, right? That it's the same ingredient for the same recipe for a different recipe, but the quantity might be different, right?
Yeah, I was wondering if I should include that. If I was going to do quantity, I would have actually made an entirely different field. No,
I think the recipe ingredient would have the quantity. No.
Okay then.
Because you can have you have one type of cake takes this much sugar, but a different cake has a completely different amount of sugar, and that's in the recipe ingredient, saying that recipe has that ingredient, this quantity, right? In that here, so that quantity would go right there.
Recipe ingredient. All right. Thank you then.
Yeah. Sure.
Professor, I don't know if there's a Piazza post about that, but the quiz 9 that was supposed to be today, I cannot find a link to a quiz in Canva.
Oh yeah, let me make that available, and it'll be available through Monday.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and do you know when we'll be able to see past quiz? Oh, some of them were opened already.
Yeah, I think I made available all of them to 8.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.